I moved back to Long Island after college, just trying to figure out what my next step was. I was studying for the LSAT, thinking that I wanted to still be in law. And my father comes home from work one day and, heavier New York accent. He goes, "Dude, what are you doing? You look miserable. Throw on your boots," because I still had boots. I worked on construction sites over the summers. And, I didn't, in my head, I was like, construction doesn't feel like a career path for me because I was always just doing it during the summer and then I'd go back to school. And so I went out with him the next morning, and bright-eyed college kid. And I love telling this story because it's just, it's a funny visual. Bright-eyed college kid. I'm just like, all right, I'm on site. Which crews am I managing today? And my dad just handed me a shovel and he goes, "You dig until you know what's going on." And I was like, whoa, like that humbled me really quickly. And honestly, I'm grateful that he did that because I learned the trade, from the ground up.
This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Zach, welcome to Construction Genius.
Yes. Thank you, Eric. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you here. How did you start making the shift from general contracting into development and then later into being an owner's rep?
Yeah, great question. So another great story that I like to tell, but when I was working as a GC, one of my clients was the company that I switched over to called Joe and the Juice. And the way that I got connected with them is I was building a store for them as my client down in Tribeca here in New York. And the senior leadership was in town, and we were doing a walkthrough of the space, and they had a question for me. They were like, "What's with all the change orders, coming from you guys?" And I was like, "Listen, valid question. I think, the easiest way to respond is that, I feel like you don't necessarily have the right, or enough oversight in your in-house development team. You need to check plans. You need to make sure that the GC contracts are inclusive of everything. I had to give you a bunch of allowances in my proposal because we didn't have things defined, and those allowances came in a little bit over than what we were holding." So, I could tell that the gears were turning a little bit, and they were like, "Well, why don't you come work for us?" And so I considered it for a little bit, and I was like, you know what? I feel like my ultimate goal is to go into development, to either build brands, to expand brands, to build my own projects. And so this could be a good foray into, learning that whole aspect.
Why was that your ultimate goal? How did you get to that as you were beginning your career?
Yeah. So even when I was on the GC side, I was always kind of enamored with being I was always admiring the project leads that I was working with, my clients on the development side. I was always interested in what they had to do and also interested in the capital aspect of it. All the different pieces that they have to, maneuver across the chessboard. I was just one pivotal piece, a critical piece, in construction, but I've always wanted to kind of see the whole thing from cradle to grave, I guess is a good way to put it. So it's always been a goal of mine.
It's tremendous. So you've gone from being involved in development or working for owners to becoming an owner's rep. So based on your experience as a contractor in development, as an owner's rep, what does a successful contractor look like in terms of communication, collaboration, and delivering results?
Yeah, I would say that sounds cliche, but it really does come down to just communication. And not just communication on a substantive basis, but on a consistency basis. So anytime that I start a project and I onboard a GC, or even before we're onboarding, during the RFP process, one of my questions is, what's your cadence on reporting? Because if you think about it from, the food chain point of view, if I'm representing owner and owner needs to receive a weekly report cadenced on a weekly basis, and, you can hang your hat on that. I need information earlier that week to receive, to analyze, to review, to have an exchange, to a dialogue. And then I need time on my team needs time to aggregate a report and then issue it by 3:00 on Friday. That's typically all reports are out by 3:00 on Friday. A lot of my owners have mentioned that, they like to, pop open the reports on Saturday morning with coffee and just kind of review what happened on site, what's coming up. So I try to establish a cadence of receiving site photos latest, Thursday afternoon. So I have Friday morning to review, to ask any questions so that I'm armed with knowledge leading up to the owner. And it's not just the GC that I request that cadence on, it's the furniture procurement, it's design process, it's any and all stakeholders, because me and my role, I own the master schedule and the master budget. So I need to know any and all fluctuations. So to me, what really sets apart a GC in my eyes is the ability to communicate and consistently so that I can expect it and it always comes through and I don't have to chase, because when I have to chase, it becomes really frustrating for everyone.
Let me ask you this. If communication is so vital, how do you balance when you're selecting a GC or deciding whether or not to work with that person after working with them on one project? Let's say you have someone who's a tremendous communicator, but when you compare them to another GC, maybe they're not as fast, or maybe their quality it's acceptable, but it's not as high as somebody else. Where do you place that consistency of communication and the quality of the communication in comparison to things like speed and quality?
Yeah, great question. And you know as well as I do that there's always a triangle. It's fast, cheap, and high quality.
But the communication's a different piece of that. You know what I mean?
It is. It is. Yeah, for sure. That's more on the logistical side of things. I think that it really depends on, ultimately, because I'm representing owner, I would have my own answer as a developer and as an owner, and I can get into that as well. But I think from my perspective, this is also a question that I ask owners. I'm like, hey, do you care about getting, cadenced formatted reports? Do you care that it just gets done on time? Do you care about, the level of quality? Do you care about, how would you rank these things?
Yes.
Because then that allows me to make decisions on their behalf to make sure that they're taken care of. And I'll give you a quick example.
Yeah.
At one of the projects that I'm working on right now, the client is most concerned with quality and cadence of reporting. Pricing is less of a concern. And the reason why is because they're teamed up with an LP group that has a good bit of money. The underwriting is quite healthy. And so they ultimately care about the product quality and the end user's experience, as well as providing reports to these LPs who, again, must be nice, but they have a fairly unlimited amount of capital to put towards this within a reasonable amount. But they care about getting cadenced reports. They care about how high quality the work is. And the overall cost of the project is a little bit less relevant. Now, on the flip side, I have another client who's looking to expand quickly. They have a bit more of like a quick service restaurant concept. Yeah. And so finish quality is a little bit less of an index factor. A lot of it is brand standard work as well. So, there's only so many ways that you can mess up installing subway tile on a back bar. So, but they care more about price and less about communication, if you can believe it. So They're like, if I get a monthly report and it's a 4-month project, that's fine. I just want some site pictures here and there. You could text them to me. And it's not as official of a process. So it's very client dependent, I would say, Eric.
That's interesting, because that leads me to the question about how contractors, how can they stand out during the bidding and selection process that's managed by an owner's rep? Because I think you're really kind of hitting on it here a little bit, is kind of understanding what is the end client actually looking for here, not only in the end product that they want, but the process of building that product.
Certainly. I think that for me as Meerkat and as owner's rep, I think that there is a base level threshold of what I would like to see on a reporting basis, because I can't fly fully blind. Otherwise, I'm not, servicing my client correctly. But there is a difference between, giving me a call at the end of the week and then I could take notes versus getting a full cadenced report with bullet points via Procore. Like there's a difference, but as long as I'm getting some kind of information, I'm okay with that. I would say, to answer your question directly, 2 things come to mind. I would say that one is asking questions. I think that I start to get a little bit, even if the plans are fully buttoned up and we present a full package, I think that contractors that don't ask questions, that don't want to see the site, that don't want to, walk the project with me, that don't want to set up a bid review, that don't really want to spend time on it, they'll slap a price. And, even if that price is where we want it to be, I would still like to see some kind of assertiveness or proactiveness. Like, hey, we're motivated to work with you guys. Here are some times that work for me for a bid review. Here are some times that work for a site visit. Because if you're the contractor and you put yourself in my shoes and ownership shoes, construction isn't the only thing we're working on. We're also working on locking down capital through fundraising. We're also working with design RFP. We're also working through permitting, expediting, entitlement if it's out of ground. So anything that you can do as a GC to minimize the friction of trying to set up a call, trying to set up a bid review. If you provide some options, that makes things a lot easier for everyone. And honestly, it kind of sets a tone of like, hey, you know what? These guys were pretty easy to work with through RFP. They asked a lot of good questions and they set up calls for us proactively. I think that bodes really well. Yeah.
So let me ask you this. It's interesting because a lot of, when I'm talking to my clients, sometimes they're like, oh yeah, there's an owner's rep on this project. And, there's a big sigh there, right? Because they see the owner's rep as a barrier sometimes to getting things done, or they really want to develop direct relationships with the owners themselves, and the owner's rep is just kind of in the way. How do you approach that in the sense of, obviously you're getting paid by the owner, so you're responsible to them, but how do you position yourself with general contractors or with subs so that they see you more as an ally as opposed to an adversary?
Great question. I think that the biggest thing that I do when I first start a project, and I do this on every project without fail, is I say, hey, I'm Zach. I have more of a construction background than I do on a development background. So right. I understand the challenges that you're facing.
Yep.
And, you should see me as someone who's a bit more of a thought partner. Like on one of my projects, it's a larger project. It's an adaptive reuse project. And so it's complicated. And we're working with a pre-con GC. And they're consistently, nervous because pricing is going up as we get further along in due diligence. And I'm like, listen, I got you. I've explained to the client that, this is, a bit of a can of worms, and they know that. So I'm tempering the client's expectations while also working with the GC on analyzing, hey, is this necessary? Could we VE this? Because I've been in their shoes.
Yeah.
And so, no one likes to be a GC and send a budget that's 25% over what the last one was. That's not a fun email to send. However, I do try to bolster people's confidence that listen, if I receive that and I can analyze that and I can go through that and I can tell you, hey, ownership doesn't care about this thing. Ownership does care about this thing. Pull that lever, push that button. Then it actually ends up presenting even better to the owners. So they're able to establish a better relationship with the owner because they come out the gate correctly.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? Because that is a major concern as you're going through that process. And what you just said there about setting owners' expectations as an owner's rep helps to smooth out the conflicts or the challenges that can be coming up all the time as you're going through the process of the project.
Yep.
With that in mind, when it comes to site visits, how do you use site visits to monitor project progress, and what should contractors focus on to demonstrate that they're staying aligned with owner expectations?
Yeah, I would say, since it's a two-part question, I'm actually going to start with the second part first.
Yeah.
Something that I've always done, and I actually had this process given to me when I was on the GC side, and I was like, hey, you know what? This is a great process. Once we have floor plans developed and, once we actually kick off construction, what I'll do is I'll actually create I'll take a copy of the architectural floor plan and I'll put a red dot and an arrow. And that red dot is where I want the super to stand, and the arrow is where I want them to take a photo. And then I'll also do kind of like a polyline, on, Bluebeam or on Acrobat. And I'll say, I would like a video from here, walking around here to here, so we can get an understanding of flow. And the reason why I do that is because consistent information is the only way that you can make sure that progress is getting pushed forward. And it's funny, sometimes some GCs are like, this feels a little micromanagey.
Sure.
And I'm like, I understand. However, if you think about it from a different perspective, if I'm communicating with the PM on the project, the PM also has an interpersonal relationship with the super, and the super has a million and one things going on. If you've ever been a construction project superintendent, you know as well as I do that the level of noise, not just on an actual physical noise basis, but the communication and this and that, the coordination is crazy. So I actually present it as, now you don't have to think about your weekly report. It's just there. You just follow this plan, put it up in the site office, you walk around, if you're the super, you text all those pictures to the PM uploads it, and then they send a share link to me and it's done within an hour. It's that fast, rather than I remember being a superintendent, many years ago at this point, and just thinking oh man, I got to go and do a weekly report. What am I going to write about? What am I going to take pictures of? It's all there already. It's
Yeah,
all,
I really
there's
like that
templated.
idea. I really like that idea because I can understand how it might rub someone the wrong way. But if you're able to repeat that over the life cycle of the project, then the consistency of the information can be tremendously useful.
Yeah. And it allows for folks to be a bit more transparent through the process,
Yeah.
which in my experience and being as a GC, like no one wants bad news. You always want to be able to, solve problems before they become a real problem. But I'm always of the opinion, and I try to create a place of, psychological safety, I guess is a good way to put it, of like,
Yeah.
hey, GC, if you're falling behind on something, that's okay right now, but we need to know so that maybe we can help. If the exhaust hood is running 4 weeks behind, maybe what we could do is we can install the equipment and, wait for the hood to come in, but we can also do a soft opening that doesn't include any hot food. There are ways that we can always, kind of pivot and make things work and still not miss our dates, even if it pushes out into day 2 work. But if we don't hear that the hood isn't installed until a week before we're supposed to open, that's when tempers run high. That's when stress goes through the roof. So if you establish that the owner's rep, the contractor, and the owner are a triumvirate of partnership and a triumvirate of partnership, and we need that transparency, it's a little bit easier to work as a team towards a common goal, which is ultimately what it is. Like, contractors are service providers for construction.
Yeah.
However, they do need to be our on-site eyes and ears, and they need to be a resource and a creative resource to help with value engineering, to help with schedule. So I think that part of the reason why I start the project with that, like the site plan, the photo plan, is that I like to establish that I'm an ally from the beginning, and ownership isn't looking for an adversarial relationship ever with their GC. Just like GCs aren't looking for that on the flip side as well with the owner and the owner's rep. So
it's like we're building and, let's be honest, we're making sausage here sometimes. And, the sausage is going to be delicious, but we really don't want to show you how we're making the sausage. That's how contractors think sometimes. What do you expect from them when unexpected site challenges arise? And how can they, because it's like they're having a conversation that maybe they're saying, hey, Zach, we're making sausage here this week and maybe next week. And you may not want to tell the owner this because at the end of the day, it's not going to affect them materially. We're still going to get the project built. How do you handle that kind of conversation?
Sure. I think that it's situationally dependent. I'll say that. I wish that there was a universal answer, but unfortunately there isn't for something like that. I think for something that's in process, I'll try to think of an example, like if the horizontal ductwork was supposed to begin that week,
right,
and it's delayed by a week, I'm not going to request that the GC says, hey, ductwork is delayed.
Right.
I'll coach them or guide them to say, hey, ductwork is in process. Outside date for ductwork has shifted slightly. This does not impact overall project timeline.
Right.
Because that's ultimately what the owner cares about. They don't care about, all the intricacies in between. A metaphor that I like to say is, the schedule is a car. And so it doesn't matter how many stops we take, how many bathroom breaks we take, how many, scenic overlooks we take. We need to get to where we're going.
Right.
And so all the stops along the way, the minutia, most owners don't care about. They don't care about whether HVAC takes 60 days or 120 days, as long as they finish within 100 or 210. That's really what it comes down to. So if it comes down to a fact where the critical path date or the opening date does push, that's a different situation in which we need to I'll group up with the GC. I'll coach them on how to deliver that news. I'll review that update. And this isn't necessarily to sweep anything under the rug or to make it softer, but so much of the stressors and anxieties on project is how things are delivered. And so,
what do you mean by that, how things are delivered? You mean how information is delivered, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Not the actual materials itself, but there's a big difference between sending an email that has, no body in the email and the subject line is just like HVAC delayed.
Right.
You don't know much about that. And so obviously like the human brain is like, okay, everything is wrong. Everything is bad. We are screwed. But if you say HVAC delayed, no hit to total project, this is what we're doing to solve it. These are the 3 options that we have in order to get the schedule back on track. That's received a lot better as a delivery of information.
As an owner's rep, are you taking some of those one-line emails that would smack your owners upside the head and then filtering them and interpreting it? Or are you coaching the contractors on how to communicate? Because I'm sure some owners are looking in on your emails and other owners are perhaps not at all. So how do you work with the contractors to make sure that they're communicating in the way that the owners want to receive the information?
Yeah, valid question. I think that it's a little bit of column A, column B. So I think for GCs that I've worked with before, a lot of times, they've worked with me, they understand what I'm looking for. And so their communication is a bit more tailored to, I get some weekly reports from GCs that I've worked with for years that I can copy, paste, change a couple words and send it directly to the owner.
Right.
That's great. I love that. But on the flip side, if that's not the case, and I'm working with a GC who's incredible on quality, but they might just need a little bit of finessing on messaging, what I'll do is twofold. One will be, I'll dig for a bit more information, in a patient way. I'll just be like, hey, okay, HVAC delayed. Does it affect project?
Yeah.
In total? Does it prompt a change order? Blah, blah, blah. And then once I have all that, I'll create that owner facing update and I'll share that with the GC. I'll see them and I'll say, okay, great. I'm going to put you on this email. You're going to see the way that I like to communicate going forward to save everybody some time. If you can emulate this template, for anything else that comes up, I would really appreciate that because it'll save you time. You won't have to take a call from me. Yep. We don't have to talk about this for a half hour. You give me all the information I need and then I can copy and paste it in. It's streamlined for everyone. But that just takes some coaching and some education. And that's fine. That's great. Part of my job is being an educator.
What's the one thing a GC will do or a sub will do where you look at them and you say, you know what? I ain't ever having you back again on a job.
Oh, man. How much more time do we have? No,
we got plenty of time. Go for it. Give me something juicy here. Because again, what we're trying to do here is give people insights into how, you as an owner's rep representing the owners think, because, the audience here really appreciates those insights. I think it'll be tremendously helpful.
Yes. I might catch some flack for this, but I think that the number one thing that comes to mind is inability to remain calm in the face of any kind of coordination slip up, because these things happen. As well as I do, construction projects are hugely complicated. Whether it's a 500 square foot jewelry boutique, or if it's a 50,000 square foot boutique hotel renovation. I think that I purposely align myself now that I have the choice. As I own my own company now. I purposely align myself with design resources, with contracting resources, and also, honestly, with owners that are, for the most part, calm and grounded and analytical.
Right.
Because I can tell you there's an extremely positive correlation between projects where people are hot-headed more often than not, and them running over budget and past schedule. Because you can't think clearly when you're under duress, and you can't think clearly when you're anxious and stressed out, and you're looking for the nearest exit because the building is on fire, the building being the project. And so you might run through a door that might have another fire in that room versus just, breathing deeply and just understanding, okay, this is what we're facing. This is how we get from here to there. And let's work as a team towards that. And let's not get, too emotional about it, because the emotionality can sometimes cloud the logic.
How do you control yourself in those situations? Because I totally get where you're coming from. And some people are more temperamentally inclined to being calmer, where others are kind of hotheads. How do you go into a meeting where either you might get heated or they're going to get heated? There's some sort of conflict going to happen. What do you do to prepare for that?
It sounds kind of silly, but I'll start the call or I'll start the exchange with like, hey, listen, this might get a little heated. And it's funny how even just those words can sometimes work to like pre-diffuse the situation, and setting it with intention and saying like, hey, listen, like I'll jump in and as project lead, I'll say, hey, these 3 things happened on site this week. We can't allow those to happen again. So I understand that tensions may be running high right now, but the only way out is through. We're not going to be able to peel it back. We don't have a time machine. So let's figure out where we stand. Let's understand what everybody's needs are. And it's okay if we leave this call. And I also say, it's okay if we leave this call with some unresolved conflict, because
that's very good.
Then not everybody's stressed out that everybody's schedules are, crazy, hard stops and back-to-back meetings.
Yes.
But if you say, let's try to resolve these 3 things, there might be 3 things that we have to drop this call on. But if we set the intention from the start that these 3 things have to get resolved, so let's focus on those things and not stress out that we need to solve 6 things on this call, then at least that gives us some more breathing room to actually think fully and listen to each other and not cut each other off, and stay cool, calm, and collected throughout the procedure.
If you struggle with micromanagement, you need to take my course, The Shift, because The Shift is the easiest way for a construction pro to move from micromanaging to leading with confidence. You cannot do everything yourself. You have to learn how to delegate and hold people accountable. And my course, The Shift, will teach you how to do that. In addition, it will help you to learn how to manage your time, build an effective team, run great meetings, and also chart out a vision for where you want to go in your career and in your business for the next 3 to 5 years. So go to theshift.constructiongenius.com. Check out everything about the course. There's a number of resources there that'll help you to think through whether or not you should take it. It's only for people who want to improve as leaders. There are no magic pills in life, but there are great resources that if you use and apply them can be truly transformative. And that is exactly what The Shift is. So go to theshift.constructiongenius.com, learn all about the course, sign up for it, take the course, and I will guarantee that you will get a return on investment 100%. So if you don't like the course, if it's not a fit for you, if for whatever reason it just isn't worth your time and money, contact me and I will happily refund you all of your money. All right, let's get back to the interview with Zach. Okay, so this is actually very good here. So the first thing is you acknowledge it might get heated at the beginning. You affirm the fact that we're committed to the project and finishing the project. And of course, the only way forward is through. You say it's okay if we don't resolve everything, but then you identify the key things that do need to be addressed in that meeting.
Yes. And I should also mention that before that meeting, I mentioned what the 6 things are that we need to resolve, but I bold the things that do need to be resolved today. So
yes.
If there's lead time issues on 3 material types and somebody dropped the ball and didn't do a submittal, or somebody didn't release a material, who cares at this point? All we need to figure out is how we get these things on site as fast as possible. Now, the other 3 things might be an open change order that isn't mission critical. It might be a disagreement about, a paint color. Someone painted something and it should be something else, and Doesn't matter for that call. We need to figure out what's mission critical, and then we'll figure out a follow-up call to talk about the open change order and the paint color mishap. Because a lot of times if you try to, to your sausage example, try to pack 10 pounds of sausage into a 5-pound bag, it's going to burst. So I think that it's critical just to keep the project and team kind of laser focused on the most critical stuff, because the critical tasks change throughout a project.
Yes.
Paint color is not critical on day 1. It is on day 25.
Yes.
Yes.
So that's interesting, right? Because you have to understand where you are in the project and allow the project timeline and schedule to dictate what takes priority in terms of the discussion.
Yes, 100%, Eric. I think that that's a mistake. Not a mistake, I shouldn't say mistake, but I think that that's something that some project teams do, is focus on the blades of grass versus the forest.
Right.
It doesn't matter, or like, I've been on projects, I should say. I've been on projects where the ownership group will be more focused on the fabric for, the upholstery for the custom furniture, rather than getting our permit set, signed off and completed on time. Because it doesn't matter at that point. Like, even if we have to wait an extra week for the bed, if it's a long lead time, yes, you might be able to focus on both things at once. But if we don't get this permit set in, guys, we are not opening. So there's a level of criticality. I don't know if that's a word, but we're going with it.
Let's talk about that then, because it's like you have a wide variety of contractors, but you also have a wide variety of owners. You have some owners who are like, here, Zach, run with it. I just want a weekly report or whatever. But then you have people who they want to get involved and they have no clue what they're talking about. So how do you manage owners who are well-meaning but clueless?
I think that a lot of what I was saying before, a lot of my role and Meerkat's role is education. And patient education.
Yeah.
I think that part of the reason why I started Meerkat is because throughout my journeys, my career and my friendships and relationships, I've learned that there are a lot of people that have incredible ideas, but they don't know how to execute them.
Right.
And it turns out that their options are never do it, which is sad. Like, someone not realizing their dreams. Like, that's something that I want to try to solve. Their second option is to go with, a larger firm like a JLL or a CBRE and spend altogether too much money on project management. And 3 is to go it alone, learn along the way. But, ChatGPT is not going to, tell you how to develop a restaurant. It
Yeah,
might
yeah, yeah.
tell you in general terms, and I'm not discounting that, but when it comes down to the actual nuances and complexities, it's a very complex process. So I think that for the folks that don't really know where to start, I typically like to take a tone, and I think a general theme here is expectation setting.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that a good way to start a project is to say, hey, you're not always going to know all the terms that I'm talking about on these calls. You're not. You're not going to know what the DOH is. You're not going to know what AHJ is. You're not going to know what a lot of these terms are. But all I'm asking is for you to trust me on this because I've done this before, and take notes during our weekly calls of anything that you want a further explanation on. But
Right.
all I'll ask is that you don't interrupt the call with, and hey, what's this? And hey, what's this?
Yeah.
Because, even though a 5 minute, interlude to explain something doesn't seem like a lot, if it happens on a weekly basis, after 10 meetings, that's almost an hour that we've lost on the project. And time is so, so critical when it comes to, these project schedules.
Yeah. So what sets apart the contractors who work most effectively with owners reps from the folks who just kind of fail all the time?
Yeah, I would say that it comes back to communication. I
Yeah.
think that, and obviously quality, of course, but you don't really, it's difficult to understand the level of quality until the project is completed.
Yeah.
But giving owners the warm and fuzzies throughout the project is always, the way to make them, feel better about the process. Even if on the tail end of things that we're doing a punch list and some of the quality is slightly off, if we're on time and we're on budget, a lot of those things often tend to get overlooked because owners really only just care about the cash register ringing.
Yes.
To a certain extent, of course, if the paint color is so wildly off in the guest rooms of a hotel, like that does need to be resolved.
Yep.
But I do think that some contractors often take the mentality of, let me run with this and I'll let you know when I'm done.
Yeah. 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 It happens all the time, huh?
Yeah. And the conflict for that is that for a lot of owners, whether it's institutional or personal, mom and pop,
Yep.
this is a big, big investment for them.
It's
This
huge.
is some of my clients, they've liquidated their stock portfolios and they're going all in. So
Right.
the level of trust that they have for me and for the project team is paramount.
How
And
do you
so,
handle that pressure yourself when you know that your clients are that leveraged? So you were talking about someone earlier who's got a bunch of cash, and so maybe it's not like a big deal, but then you're dealing with those other folks who, they're looking at you and they're saying, Zach, man, if this doesn't fly, we're done. How do you handle that?
yeah, so a lot of that comes down to initial budgeting. I'll say, listen, can you spend $1 million? And they say, yes. Like, can you spend $1.1 million? And they go, no. I go, okay. So the project budget is now 850,000 because we need
Yeah.
150 of contingency.
Yeah.
And that means that maybe you can't get the nice tile, and that's fine. But I think that coming into it with nice soft level of at least 15% owner contingency, and then also contingency on the schedule as well. Like I just built out a project schedule. I feel pretty confident I'll be able to turn it over in August, but we're currently showing a turnover in October.
Right.
And so they have already budgeted into their corporate budget for 2 months of rent with no revenue. So if it does butt up in there, okay, we got it covered. If
Yeah.
it doesn't, great, we just found a bunch of money. It's okay.
So when do you walk away from a deal? Because like you talked about earlier, that the type of person you want to work with, you don't want to work with hotheads and, people who are, yellers and screamers. I get that. But when does your spidey sense start going off and you're like, you know what, I don't think this is going to be a fit for me?
Yeah, just as important. I was just telling a friend about this. I was like, just as important as winning deals is knowing when, like you said, the spidey sense kicks in and having that core intuition. I think for me, and this usually presents fairly early on in the process, I think for me, it's when I start providing schedules and budgets and they say, well, why can't we do it for or like, why is HVAC 200 grand? The last one I did was 100.
Right.
And I'm like, well, you want a different product here. You're basically doubling your operation, so on and so forth. And I think it becomes a little more frustrating, not frustrating, but a little bit more of a mental bandwidth exercise for me if I'm constantly having to justify everything that I do and everything that I've developed domain experience around. I've even left jobs in the past where I'll provide a budget and they'll say we need to do it for half. And then I agree to it because I'm a W-2 employee. And then I end up having to do a lot of the work myself. Like my electrical allowance gets cut. So I have to show up with wire snips and a tool belt. And that's not the role that I want to be in at this
Yep.
point.
Yep.
So I guess to answer your question in short form, I think anything past healthy pushback or informational gathering questions will typically set off an internal alarm. And I'll say, you know what? Like, these projects are long. This isn't like a 8-week engagement or even 4. This is like a 52+ week engagement where I'm going to have to go to battle every week. And that's not worth it to me as a business owner.
So let's flip that a little bit then and give some advice to contractors. So, you're looking at an opportunity, you're dealing with an owner or an owner and an owner's rep. What are some things that are for you red flags from a contractor's perspective where you're like, dude, I'm just going to walk away from this? Because if I sign, I'm going to personally guarantee this particular project. And so that's going to bite me in the butt if this goes south.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, first of all, if any GCs are listening and you get an RFP from Meerkat, you know that the owners are going to be good.
Yeah,
so
right.
don't worry about that. I got you. It's pre-qualified.
That's interesting. Yeah. So that's actually a really good reason to work with a construction management firm, because they're doing the qualifying of the owners for you.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times my clients will either, have reached out to 1 or 2 GCs in the vicinity that they're looking at, but most of the time, it's the architect is the first call and then I'm the second, or it's vice versa. And then we start reaching out to GCs. And because I've been in this world for a long time, I have a great Rolodex of GCs that I trust. And so when I call a GC, here in New York, for example, even just last week, I got a call from a client to do a site visit at 11 a.m. on Friday. Thursday afternoon, I called a trusted construction partner, met me on site. And it was just like that, like no charge, free estimate. And that's because I hold these relationships and I give people a call for no reason, not no reason, but just to catch up. And they trust that I'll do right by them, because if I'm on the project, if Meerkat is on the project, their requisitions are going to get reviewed on time. They're going to be actually, verified. We're going off topic from your question, but
but just specifically, again, the spidey sense, because, it seems like some contractors, they're always banging their heads against the wall and complaining about their clients. I'm like, dude, why don't you just, make a list of go, no go items when it comes to going with them and, working with them. And if they don't hit the goes, then don't go.
Yeah, 100%. And, in a vacuum, that's exactly what it is. I think that the biggest thing for contractors to look out for and question to ask is, it's actually twofold. One is the project fully capitalized?
There you go.
That is the biggest stressor. And I guess 2, this is a bit of a litmus test. If you ask, is the project capitalized, and they get offended or upset?
Yes.
Run away.
Yeah.
Because I asked that question as well. And for me, I don't necessarily care if you're fully capitalized. If you're at 50%, then I can help you get to 100 because of my experience in the capital markets of, raising money for different ventures.
Yep.
So I can actually be a bit of a consultant for them on that and get them in a room with certain LPs and capital groups. So for me, it's different. But for GCs, you're not doing that. That's not your role. You're a construction services provider. So ask if the money's there. And if they get offended, you're out. If they say no, it's a judgment call. You can even ask. Yeah. It's within your right as a GC. And a lot of GCs don't realize this. You can ask, okay, if you're not fully funded, are you 75%? What do you have liquid? Ask these questions, because the last thing you want is for pay rec 1, 2, and 3 to hit, and then pay rec 4 comes through and they're like, we're waiting on a check. You're like, well, now I owe my plumber for 75% of their work. I owe my in-house labor team, so on and so forth. So ask those questions.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
I would caution, or I would recommend, just like budget, budget and schedule are the marriage. Yep. I would ask, hey, what's your target opening date for this? And if the target opening date feels totally unreasonable, then I would walk, because, and as a construction professional, I would think that you would understand, what the design process would look like. I would think you'd understand what the permitting process would look like for your jurisdiction that you're in. So, you can size up very quickly. You can run a 3-line Gantt that says design, permitting, construction.
Yes.
And if those blocks are over what their target opening is, your next step would be, hey, I did a quick internal calc and it looks like you're at October 5th instead of July 5th. And if they say it needs to be July 5th, you say, thank you, no thank you.
Right.
Because guarantee that you'll put together a proposal, they'll accept it, and then they'll hold your feet to the fire on liquidated damages, and nobody wants that.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. That's excellent. Hey, this is Eric. Hope you're enjoying my interview with Zach. And a quick shout out for my book, Construction Genius. effective, hands-on, practical, simple, no BS leadership, strategy, sales, and marketing advice for construction companies. I was talking to one of my clients just this week, and he is going through the book for the third time. And that's one of the great things about the book, is that you can reread it because the advice in here is applicable throughout your journey as a construction company owner and leader. And so you can just pick up the book, you can turn to one of the chapters, and you can dive into how to be more effective in your leadership role. So for instance, I just opened to chapter 5, Incentivizing Greatness and Building Future Leaders. It's a chapter packed with practical advice on compensation and motivating people through incentives. And so you want to get this book on Amazon. It's only $19.99 a copy. And if you buy 10 or more copies, you send me an email, eric@constructiongenius.com, and I will come and do a 1-hour question and answers session with your team, who you give the books to, and then also a bonus leadership training session. That 1 hour is valued at $3,500. If you buy 10 copies of the book, that's less than $200, and that's tremendous value for you. So check out the book. I know you'll love it. And now let's get back to the interview with Zach. Okay, so if you could just sum this all up, what we've talked about the last 40 minutes or so, if you could give one piece of advice to a contractor on how to work more effectively with an owner's rep, what would it be?
I feel like the most universal term here is communication.
Yeah, it is. Huh?
And you know what? I'll even go a little bit more general. I would say proactivity.
Yes.
I think that it's always a pleasure for me. And I even said it this morning with a GC I'm working with. I'm like, dude, when I get a call from you, it's like, I feel like you know what's going on. Like, I don't have to chase you. And
that's cool.
Even GCs that are totally on top of it, if I don't hear from them, it's just unfortunate. But the reality is that I start to think that they're not. And so I never want people to feel like they're bothering me. You know, like even just on this podcast so far, I've had 4 phone calls come in because I established these relationships with these, the architecture firms and GCs, and they can call me whenever. And I set myself as a role as a thought partner for the service providers. And because I speak the ownership language as well, I'm able to work with them as a coach.
That's
so
good.
I think if GCs want to set themselves apart, I think proactivity with owner/owner rep, consistent cadence of updates, and don't sweep things under the rug.
So let me ask you then, when's the best time to bring up a change order?
As soon as you identify something. Like, for example, I'll give you a real world example right now. We are in the process of finalizing design for a restaurant that I'm doing. And it turns out that, the ownership group now wants to do, an additional kitchen or an additional hood.
Yep.
As soon as that order comes down, I want the GC and their subcontractor to start working on pricing as a potential change order PCA.
Right.
Or PCO. And I want to see that as soon as that's ready. That doesn't mean that ownership needs to see it, because I'll be the one to check that against budget. And again, not hiding it from ownership, but there's nothing worse than, having a draft PCO go to an ownership group that is not the scope that I think it needs to be. And it's wildly inflated because there was a misunderstanding of scope or, the terms. So as soon as a change order, crosses the barrier from imagination into, hey, we want to check this out, present it immediately. Doesn't matter if it's a Friday or a Monday or, before the weekly call or after the weekly call, during the weekly call, bring it up. And, it's an adept owner's rep is going to receive that information. They're going to look at it with, universal validity lens on, because when I was with Joe and the Juice, the saying was no change orders. And I never really agreed with that, because I think that things can change. There's field conditions, so on and so forth. I think that a good mantra would be limit change orders.
Yeah, there you go.
And add allowances and contingencies so that a change order isn't an addition to budget. It's just it's just a modification.
So how do you handle this? Like when, you hear this all the time that, a contractor, they decide to eat a particular change order because they're going to get something else later on. How do you talk to your contractors in terms of saying, hey, let's not present this change order because I kind of want to save my fire with the owner until later on in the project, and I've got your back in this situation, and we'll make sure that you're straight by the end of the project. Do you ever work like that with them, or do you just kind of go right down the line?
I do. I think that it's client dependent and project dependent, because if it's a standalone project and it's like an individual, like mom and pop hire me and there's trust involved and they're doing one hotel and there's no promise of any additional, I think if it's within that project's ecosystem, I'm a lot more firm on this needs to be a fair price. This needs to be transparent. And I'm strict on fair and transparency fairness and transparency to begin with.
Yeah.
But if I'm doing like a multi-project or a multi-location rollout for a concept, and we have the same architecture firm and we have the same interior design firm and the same GC firm, I'm like, let's say project A is 4 weeks ahead, and we learn that the HVAC CFM needs to be doubled, and that prompts a change order. I'll say, listen, take it easy on me here.
Yeah.
And let's just distribute that cost to stores 2 and 3 so that, we don't see, like, if we're looking at like a bar graph of the different locations, we don't see a spike like that. We see just like a bit of like a bell curve.
That's
kind of
cool.
like that.
Nice.
And I'm proactive in communication with the client on that as well. That decision isn't made in a vacuum.
No.
The client may want the spike on that one project. They also may want it to be distributed, especially if they're going for like a fundraising round where they say, hey, this store was $500 a foot. This store was $350. What happened there? Versus all of our stores are $400 a foot, just using round numbers, for example. So it's very dependent on what the motivations are for ownership. And that's on me to figure out what those motivations are and how to convey that.
That's interesting because, if you're going to be a successful contractor in a particular area, particular project type, you have to be kind of savvy and willing for those discussions as opposed to like my way or the highway, hard-headed kind of, this is the way it's got to be.
Yeah, definitely. I always like to say that like nobody's king. It's impossible to, be super strict or like thick-headed when it comes to these things because there's always some play. Everything's a negotiation. And ultimately what we want to try to come down to is the schedule going to be adhered to? Is the budget to a relative sense going to be adhered to? And the budget that's, just a quick tip, the budget that's conveyed to, GCs and to furniture providers, if the owner's rep and the owner's company and the owner firm is good, they have owner contingency. So if it's $1 million, that's the communicated budget. It's not like, a change order that puts us at 1.05 is going to kill the project. It'll just mean that we need to be very discerning with our funds and make sure that that's a fully fair and validated change order.
That's great. So Meerkat, why'd you call your company Meerkat Development?
I love this question. It's funny, when I decided to start my own company, day one, I hired an excellent branding and creative agency, and I'll give you the link just in case, listeners want to reach out to them. But
that'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah. They are based in Argentina, actually. And the reason why I wanted to go with them is because English is not their first language. And I've worked with, all kinds of different groups that are either named after the person, like the last name, or like they're very like clinical or strict, or like, format developers, or like, symbiosis developers, like very, I don't know what the word is, but I specifically wanted to be a bit more eccentric and approachable because a lot of the companies that I'm working with are smaller brands. They are development scares the hell out of them. So I wanted to be approachable, almost like kind of fun with branding for my company. And I love telling this story, but day one of me hiring them, I was like, hey, no animal names. I think they're corny. They were like, okay. And then so we go through like, like a 6-week process of like iteration and programming and, like understanding what the brand ethos is and what I do and what the company does. And option number 1 was Meerkat. And I was like, guys, what did I say? Come on, like, what are we doing here? Can't listen to direction. And so what's funny is that they explained why.
Right.
And it really resonated with me. So Meerkats as a group typically have a leader. They typically have a scout. That's the leader. So they'll go ahead. They'll scan for any risk. Right. That leader is also in charge of resource allocation. That leader is also in charge of moving the pack if they need to and establishing a domicile elsewhere. And so to me, the corollary is very much related to project management and very much related to development. You need someone who's adept at allocating resource. You need someone who's, scanning for risk at all time. You need someone that's able to like move everyone in the same direction. And so Meerkat actually made a lot of sense to me the more that I thought about it. And from a Google search engine optimization point of view, there's no Meerkat development. There's no Meerkat companies. So it felt like the right fit. And they did a great job with branding, with logo work, with fonts, with color paletting. So
that's cool. So it's interesting. Would you say your brand is more owner-faced as opposed to contractor-faced?
I would say that yes, it is owner faced because my client ultimately is the
they're the
owner.
ones who are paying you. Yeah.
Yeah, but I will say that, on GCs that I've issued RFPs to, they, a lot of times, like I'll get on the phone with them and they'll be like, listen, I think your branding is awesome. Like, I love the company name. I
Interesting.
love, what you stand for, what the ethos is. Like, I'm really excited to work with, an owner's rep of this caliber. Cause like you said earlier in the podcast, it's like
Yeah, right.
a lot of times owners reps are looked at as glorified babysitters, or what I like to call is problem pushers.
Yeah.
Like, for example, even just last week, there was a client of mine, we were doing a weekly call and the contractor had something that they needed from the architect. And so we just, the contractor was like, hey, I need this, I need this, I need this. And historically, most owners reps would have just been like, okay, architecture. And then what are you doing at that point? You're just kind of like a conduit, and like, we're all adults. If the GC knows to reach out to the architect, then they will.
Yep.
However, I like to cultivate a culture of, full collaboration. And so if the GC vocalizes that they need something on the weekly call, I'll be like, okay, cool. And so architecture, what do you think your time frame is on developing, the plan revision for that? Then they can answer me. Then I can consult the schedule and I could say, okay, you know what? We don't need it in a week. You actually have 2 weeks to make sure that it's 100% correct. And then I check with the GC and I say, hey, 2 weeks, okay? And they're like, yeah, I'll let the subs know. And then that's it. So it could be something where that's a ticking time bomb as a request. And what I've learned on the GC side, and then also just in all my travels, is that a lot of times GCs and architects and design professionals can sometimes feel like they're at odds because there's different agendas.
Yeah.
So if there's someone who's actually a collaboration first minded person, then it actually alleviates a lot of those issues and keeps things running smoothly.
That's cool. It's cool. Well, so you're in New York, Zach. I'd like a restaurant recommendation, please, if I'm in New York City. I know that's a hard one because there's so many restaurants. I know. Whenever I ask guys from New York City, they're like, come on, man.
Yeah, come on.
Just give me one though. Like if you're landing in New York, let's say you don't want to blow the budget, but you want to get some really good food. Where are you going? Where's the one place you're going?
Yeah, great question. I think I'll say Scars Pizza if you want to slice. Pizza. Scars is incredible in Soho. And then one that I've been really craving lately, or that I've been really loving and craving lately, is a place called Wayan, Wayan, also down in Soho. Incredible. And if you want to go for an authentic New York experience, if you drink, there's a place called McSorley's. And McSorley's is the oldest ale house in New York from, the early 1800s, or, sometime in the 1800s. And quick fun fact, my grandfather and my great-grandfather from Ireland actually used to go to that pub. So
no way.
It's an institution in New York and it's worth it. They have sawdust on the floor and pictures from the last century and, newspapers from like the early 1900s that are framed in the original. And so it's an institution. That's all I can say.
That's beautiful. So we got Scars, we got Wayan, and we got McSorley's.
Yes.
All the links will be in the show notes.
With that.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
You can do that all in one day too. If you
go to Scars for lunch, you go to McSorley's for a little afternoon beverage, and then you hit up Wayan for the dinner, right?
Eric, I think you just described my ideal Saturday.
There you go. The ideal Saturday. Cool. Just tell us a little bit more about how we can get in touch with you, Zach.
Yeah. So you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I also, I drop a lot of like project management tips and tricks and all that. You can check me out at meerkatdevelopment.com. That lists, active projects, current projects, always being updated. And then follow me on social media at Meerkat Development on Instagram. I think that's about it. I also have a newsletter that I'm beginning, or that we've released 2 volumes so far. Cool. It's called Built for Stories. And so, Eric, I'll send you a link to subscribe to that, and you can put that in the show notes as well.
That'd be great. Yeah, all those things will be in the show notes. Zach, I know we've got a ton of value from this conversation. Lots of great stuff. So I really appreciate you coming on the show here today.
I'm so happy. I've been excited for this day for a long time because I think that my experience is varied and eclectic, like you said, and I think it could provide a lot of value to your listeners. So
that's tremendous. I really appreciate it, man.
Well, thank you for having me, Eric.
You're welcome. Thank you for listening to today's interview with Zach. All the links are in the show notes to the restaurants and also to Zach's website and social links. Feel free to share this interview with other people who you think would benefit from listening to the show. And appreciate you listening to Construction Genius. Please give us a rating and a review wherever you get your podcasts. And I'll catch you on the next episode. Thank you for listening to this episode of Construction Genius. Hope you found that 1% of inspiration to help you in the next few days. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes, share it with other construction leaders who you think would benefit, and always remember that the show is brought to you by Kick-Ass Meetings. I've been working with construction leaders since 2004, teaching them how to run extremely effective problem-solving meetings that gets their people collaborating, taps into their creativity. And to get yourself a free copy of the Kick-Ass Meeting Report, go to www.ericanderton.com/kickassmeetings. Grab yourself that free report, read it, use it in your business. You'll find it extremely useful. And thanks again for listening.